The morning sun cast long shadows across the Riverside County shooting range as Margaret Maggie Chin stepped out of her dusty pickup truck, her weathered hands carefully cradling a rifle case that had seen better decades. The case itself told a story. Cracked leather corners held together with electrical tape, brass clasps green with age, and a faded military sticker that read "Property of U.S. Army," barely visible beneath layers of scratches and wear. At 63 years old, Maggie moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had spent a lifetime handling firearms. But her slight frame and graying hair often fooled people into thinking she was just another curious senior citizen dabbling in hobbies. Today, however, she had come to the range with a purpose that burned quietly in her chest like banked coals waiting for wind. The Riverside County Annual Precision Shooting Championship drew marksmen from across California, Arizona, and Nevada. Prize money of $25,000 attracted serious competitors: military veterans, law enforcement officers, professional hunters, and sponsored shooters with equipment worth more than most people's cars. The registration tent buzzed with testosterone-fueled conversations about custom barrels, hand-loaded ammunition, and $1,000 scopes that could supposedly see into the next county. Maggie approached the registration table, where a beefy man in tactical gear looked up from his clipboard with barely concealed impatience. His name tag read, Rick, Range Officer, and his expression suggested he had better things to do than process late entries from elderly ladies who probably couldn't tell the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. "Entry fee is $300, ma'am," Rick said without looking up from his paperwork. "Competition starts in 30 minutes. You sure you're in the right place? The craft fair is downtown." The comment drew snickers from nearby competitors who were adjusting their high-tech equipment. A tall man in desert camouflage fatigues looked over with amusement, his custom rifle worth more than some people's annual salaries gleaming in the morning light. Another shooter, sporting a shirt that proclaimed "Precision is perfection," paused his scope adjustment to watch the interaction with obvious entertainment. Maggie calmly pulled 3 crisp $100 bills from her wallet and placed them on the table. "Margaret Chun," she said simply, "shooting in the open division." Rick's eyebrows rose slightly as he processed the paperwork. "What rifle you shooting today, Mrs. Chun?" Instead of answering immediately, Maggie unlatched her ancient rifle case. The hinges creaked like old ship timbers as she opened it, revealing a rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a modern shooting competition. The weapon was an M1 Garand, its wooden stock bearing the scars and dings of decades of use. The metal showed honest wear, with bluing worn thin in places where countless hands had gripped it. Despite its age, the rifle was meticulously maintained. Every surface clean, the action smooth, the barrel bore spotless. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Several nearby shooters turned to look, and the atmosphere shifted from mild annoyance to barely contained laughter. The man in desert camouflage actually chuckled out loud, while another competitor whispered something to his buddy that included the words "antique" and "museum piece." "Well, I'll be damned," said a gravelly voice from behind the group. Everyone turned to see Jake Morrison, a local legend who had won the championship 3 years running. Jake was the kind of shooter who could put 5 rounds into a quarter at 300 yards, and his opinion carried weight among the competition crowd. He examined Maggie's rifle with the eye of someone who knew firearms intimately. M1 Garand, probably manufactured around 1943 or 1944, Jake said, his tone respectful but puzzled. "Beautiful rifle, ma'am, but this is precision shooting. That old girl was built for battle, not target competition. The trigger alone probably weighs 8 pounds, and without a scope." He gestured toward the modern rifles surrounding them, each bristling with optical equipment and precision modifications. Maggie nodded politely. "It's the rifle my father carried through the Pacific Theater, Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Philippines. He brought it home and taught me to shoot with it when I was 12 years old." The information seemed to shift the mood slightly. Even the most arrogant competitors generally respected military history, though it didn't change their assessment of her chances in a modern precision shooting match. "That's real nice, ma'am," said the man in tactical gear, his tone now more condescending than hostile. "Family heirloom and all that. But this isn't a historical demonstration. We're talking about precision shooting at ranges up to 800 yards. These guys have been training for months with equipment specifically designed for this kind of competition. "You'll miss, sweetheart," called out someone from the back of the group, the comment followed by more chuckles. "Might want to stick to the shorter ranges. Save yourself some embarrassment." Maggie's expression didn't change, but those who knew her well would have recognized the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested the old competitive fire was beginning to stir. She carefully closed her rifle case and accepted her competitor number, 47, pinning it to her simple khaki shirt. The first stage of the competition involved shooting at 200 yards, with competitors firing 5 shots for score from a supported prone position. Modern precision rifles dominated the early rankings, with shooters using everything from custom-built bolt-action rifles to semi-automatic precision platforms that cost more than luxury cars. Electronic wind meters, ballistic calculators, and range-finding scopes were standard equipment. Maggie found herself assigned to Relay 3, shooting alongside some of the most confident competitors. As she set up her shooting mat and unpacked her simple gear, a basic spotting scope, a small notebook with handwritten data, and a box of standard military surplus ammunition, the comments continued. "Look at that setup," someone whispered. "She's got to be shooting military ball ammo. Probably hasn't been sorted for consistency or anything. Against hand-loaded match ammunition, she doesn't have a prayer." The technical differences were real and significant. Modern match ammunition was loaded to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, with bullets balanced and weighted to ensure perfect flight characteristics. Powders were measured to the individual grain, and cases were prepared with scientific precision. Military surplus ammunition, while reliable and accurate enough for its intended purpose, was mass-produced to looser tolerances that prioritized function over precision. Similarly, the optical advantages enjoyed by other competitors were substantial. While Maggie would be shooting with the M1's standard iron sights, simple metal posts, and apertures designed for battlefield use, her competition sported scopes with magnification ranging from 10x to 25x, allowing them to see target details that would be invisible to the naked eye. As the relay prepared to begin shooting, Maggie took her position with the fluid movements of someone who had done this thousands of times. She loaded an 8-round clip into the Garand with the distinctive metallic ping that World War II veterans remembered well. The rifle itself was heavier than modern precision weapons, weighing nearly 10 pounds compared to the 7 or 8 pounds typical of custom competition rifles. "Relay 3, you have 5 minutes for unlimited sighting shots," announced the range officer through a megaphone. "Targets are at 200 yards. Most competitors fired several sighting shots, adjusting their scopes and calculating wind corrections with scientific precision. Electronic wind meters indicated a light breeze from the left, and shooters made minute adjustments to their equipment accordingly. Maggie fired 2 sighting shots, her rifle producing the sharp crack characteristic of .30-06 ammunition. Through her spotting scope, she could see both rounds had struck the target near the center. Though without the magnification available to other shooters, she couldn't make precise measurements of group size or exact point of impact. "Cease fire. Make ready for record fire," came the announcement. 5 shots for score. You may begin when ready. The atmosphere grew tense as serious money and reputations hung in the balance. Shooters settled into their positions with ritualistic precision, checking and rechecking their equipment. Breathing patterns became controlled and measured. Heart rates slowed through practiced meditation techniques. Maggie's approach was notably different. She seemed relaxed, almost casual, as she settled behind her vintage rifle. Her breathing was steady but not overly controlled, and she moved with the natural rhythm of someone for whom this was as natural as walking. Her first shot broke the morning air with authority. The .30-06 cartridge produced more muzzle blast and recoil than the smaller, more efficient cartridges favored by modern precision shooters. But Maggie managed the recoil with practiced ease, her body absorbing the energy without disturbing her shooting position. Through spotting scopes, other competitors could see her bullet hole appear in the target, though at 200 yards with iron sights, precise measurement was impossible without walking down to examine the target directly. Her second shot followed 12 seconds later, then the third, fourth, and fifth in steady succession. The M1's semi-automatic action allowed relatively quick follow-up shots, though the rifle's weight and the substantial recoil of military ammunition meant that each shot required a moment to resettle before the next trigger press. When the relay concluded and targets were pulled for scoring, the results were posted electronically on large displays visible throughout the range. Most competitors in Relay 3 had shot respectable scores in the 45 to 49-point range out of a possible 50, with the X-ring, the innermost scoring area, being roughly the size of a silver dollar at 200 yards. Maggie's target showed something that made several people look twice at the scoreboard. 5 shots, all in the 10 ring, 4 of them touching the X-ring, for a score of 49 out of 50. More impressively, the group size, the measurement from the center of the widest shots, was under 2 inches. For iron sights at 200 yards, it was exceptional shooting. Lucky, someone muttered, though the comment lacked conviction. Jake Morrison studied the posted results with professional interest. A single good group could be luck, equipment, or favorable conditions. What separated true marksmen from occasional good shooters was consistency across multiple stages and ranges. "We'll see what happens when we stretch it out," he said to nobody in particular. The second stage would test competitors at 400 yards, where the effects of wind, ammunition consistency, and equipment limitations became magnified. At this range, the difference between military surplus ammunition and custom match loads would become more apparent, and the optical disadvantage of iron sights would grow more significant. As competitors moved to the 400-yard line, the conversations continued, though the tone had shifted slightly. Maggie's performance had been noted, but few believed it could be sustained against modern equipment at longer ranges. "Iron sights at 400 yards, observed one competitor to his shooting partner. "The target's going to look like a postage stamp. No way she can maintain that precision." The man was technically correct. At 400 yards, the standard NRA high-power rifle target would subtend less than half a degree of angle through iron sights. The 10 ring, which scored maximum points, would appear roughly the size of a dime held at arm's length. Modern scopes magnified the target image by 10 to 25 times, making precise aiming significantly easier. Environmental factors also became more critical at extended ranges. A 5-mile-per-hour crosswind that might move a bullet 2 inches at 200 yards could push it 4 or 5 inches at 400 yards. Temperature, humidity, and altitude all affected bullet trajectory in ways that became more pronounced with distance. Maggie prepared for the 400-yard stage with the same methodical calm she had shown earlier. She consulted her small notebook, handwritten pages of data accumulated over decades of shooting, and made a small adjustment to her rifle's rear sight elevation. Other competitors were making much more elaborate preparations. Electronic ballistic calculators processed current weather conditions, ammunition specifications, and rifle characteristics to provide precise aiming corrections. Laser rangefinders confirmed exact distances to the target. Wind meters measured not just wind speed, but direction and consistency. Relay 3, "You have 5 minutes for unlimited sighting shots at 400 yards, announced the range officer. The increased distance had sorted out some competitors whose equipment or skills weren't quite up to the longer range. Several shooters were making significant scope adjustments based on their sighting shots, and a few were clearly struggling with wind reading skills. Maggie fired 3 sighting shots this time, each followed by a careful look through her spotting scope. The increased range made target assessment more difficult with her basic optical equipment, but she seemed satisfied with what she observed. During the preparation time, Jake Morrison found himself genuinely curious about the woman shooting next to him. Her obvious competence with the vintage rifle suggested serious experience, but her age and equipment seemed inconsistent with modern competitive shooting. "Ma'am," he said politely, "mind me asking where you learned to shoot like that?" Maggie glanced over while adjusting her shooting sling, a leather military-style sling that had probably been on the rifle since the 1940s. "My father taught me when I was young. Then, I spent some time in the Army myself. Marksmanship instructor at Fort Benning for a few years back in the 80s. The information explained a few things. Military marksmanship instruction produced shooters with fundamentals that could translate across different equipment and conditions. The Army's approach emphasized consistent technique over equipment advantages, since soldiers couldn't count on having perfect rifles or ideal conditions in combat. "What brings you out to civilian competition?" Jake asked. "My grandson," Maggie replied simply. "He's been talking about how modern rifles and equipment make the old military shooting obsolete. Thinks his grandfather's war stories are just nostalgia, and that today's shooters would embarrass anyone from that generation." Jake nodded with understanding. Generational debates about equipment versus skill were common in shooting sports, though they usually didn't play out with such dramatic contrasts in equipment. "Make ready for record fire," came the announcement. 5 shots for score, 400 yards. You may begin when ready. The longer range had definitely separated serious competitors from casual participants. The rhythm of shots was slower as shooters took more time to read wind conditions and ensure precise aiming. Several competitors were clearly struggling, with shots scattered across multiple scoring rings. Maggie's approach remained notably consistent. Her shots came at steady intervals, each preceded by the same careful aiming routine. The M1's weight, which had seemed like a disadvantage earlier, actually provided stability that helped offset some of the challenges of shooting without optical magnification. Her first shot at 400 yards hit with the same authoritative crack as before. The increased range made it impossible to spot impact through iron sights, but her spotting scope showed the bullet hole appearing in the scoring area. Shot 2, 3, 4, and 5 followed in measured succession. When targets were pulled and scores posted, Maggie had again shot 49 out of 50, with 4 shots in the X ring and 1 just outside in the 9 ring. More significantly, her group size remained under 3 inches, exceptional performance for iron sights at 400 yards. The scoreboard showed Maggie tied for second place overall, behind only Jake Morrison and ahead of shooters with equipment worth 10 times what her rifle had cost new in 1943. The muttering among competitors had taken on a different tone. Lucky was being replaced by unusual and unexpected. A few shooters were beginning to take notice of technique rather than equipment, observing how Maggie built her shooting position and managed the recoil of her vintage rifle. "She's got fundamentals," admitted one competitor to his partner. "Look how consistent her position is shot to shot. No wasted motion, same routine every time." The observation was accurate. While other shooters were making constant small adjustments to equipment and position, Maggie's routine remained virtually identical for each shot. Her natural point of aim was established correctly the first time, requiring minimal adjustment between shots. Her trigger control was smooth and consistent, breaking each shot at the natural bottom of her breathing cycle. As competitors prepared for the third and most challenging stage, 600 yards, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. What had begun as mild amusement at an elderly woman with obsolete equipment had evolved into genuine curiosity about how far her unusual combination of skill and vintage rifle could carry her. The 600-yard stage would test everyone severely. At this range, even small errors in technique or equipment would be magnified into significant scoring penalties. Wind reading became critical, as a slight miscalculation could move bullets completely out of the scoring rings. More importantly, the optical limitations of iron sights would become extreme. The standard target at 600 yards would appear as a small dot through the M1's simple rear aperture, with the 10 ring virtually invisible without magnification. "This is where it ends," predicted one of the struggling competitors. "No way anyone maintains precision at 600 yards with iron sights. Not against this level of competition." Jake Morrison wasn't quite so certain. He had spent enough time around exceptional shooters to recognize that equipment advantages could be offset by superior technique and experience, at least to some extent. What he hadn't expected was to see it demonstrated so dramatically in a civilian competition. As the relay moved to the 600-yard line, Maggie consulted her notebook more carefully and made a larger adjustment to her rear sight elevation. The increase in range required compensation for bullet drop, and unlike shooters with ballistic calculators, she was relying on decades of accumulated data recorded in her own handwriting. The preparation time at 600 yards was longer, as even experienced competitors needed to account for the increased complexity of environmental factors. Wind flags placed at intervals downrange showed slight variations in wind speed and direction, information that would be crucial for accurate shot placement. Several competitors were using sophisticated wind reading techniques, observing not just the flags but mirage patterns visible through high magnification scopes. The heat rising from the ground created optical distortions that trained marksmen could read like a book to determine wind conditions along the bullet's entire flight path. Maggie's wind reading equipment consisted of her eyes, the visible wind flags, and decades of experience. She spent several minutes studying the range conditions, occasionally testing wind direction with a few blades of grass dropped from her shooting position. Relay 3. You have 5 minutes for unlimited sighting shots at 600 yards. The sighting period proved more challenging for several competitors. The increased range and wind effects caused some shooters to fire multiple sighting shots while struggling to find the correct adjustments for their equipment. A few were clearly having difficulty even hitting the target consistently. Maggie fired 4 sighting shots, making a small adjustment to her windage after the second shot. The M1 simple adjustments required more estimation than the precise click adjustments available on modern scopes, but her changes appeared to be effective based on what she could observe through her basic spotting scope. The atmosphere during the record fire period was notably different from earlier stages. Competitors were taking more time between shots, fighting wind conditions, and the inherent difficulty of the longer range. Several shooters were clearly struggling, with shots scattered across multiple scoring rings or missing the target entirely. When Maggie settled behind her rifle for the record string, Jake Morrison found himself watching her technique as much as focusing on his own shooting. Her position building was textbook perfect, body alignment, bone support, muscle relaxation, and natural point of aim all established with practiced efficiency. Her first shot at 600 yards took longer to settle than at shorter ranges. The target was a small, indistinct shape through iron sights, requiring careful estimation of hold and wind correction. When the shot broke, the recoil carried the rifle off target briefly before she regained sight picture. Through spotting scopes, observers could see her bullet impact in the scoring area, though precise ring determination would have to wait for target scoring. For more shots followed over the next 3 minutes, each requiring the same careful process of target acquisition and environmental assessment. When the targets were pulled and scored, the results posted on the electronic display drew immediate attention. Maggie had shot 47 out of 50, with 3 shots in the X ring and 2 in the 9 ring. While not quite matching her earlier performance, the score was remarkable for iron sights at 600 yards and kept her in contention for the overall championship. More importantly, her consistency across all 3 ranges had demonstrated that her shooting was based on solid fundamentals rather than luck or favorable conditions. The combination of an obsolete rifle and exceptional marksmanship was proving more effective than many competitors had thought possible. The 800-yard firing line felt different from the shorter ranges. Here, the backstop seemed impossibly distant, and targets appeared as tiny specks that wavered in the heat mirage rising from the desert floor. Even through high-powered scopes, the scoring rings were difficult to distinguish, and the X-ring, the size of a compact disc at this range, demanded precision that tested the limits of both equipment and human capability. Maggie Chin stood behind the firing line, studying the range with the same methodical attention she had applied to shorter distances. But now the challenges were exponentially greater. At 800 yards, a bullet fired from her M1 Garand would take nearly a full second to reach the target, during which time wind could push it several feet in any direction. The bullet would drop over 20 feet from its initial trajectory, requiring precise elevation adjustments that most shooters achieved through computerized ballistic calculations. Her simple iron sights, which had served adequately at shorter ranges, now faced their ultimate test. The front sight post would completely obscure the target at this distance, requiring her to aim using memorized holds based on decades of experience rather than precise sight alignment. Modern competitors with 25 power scopes could see individual bullet holes in their targets. Maggie would be fortunate to distinguish the target from the surrounding backstop. Jake Morrison set up his equipment 3 positions to her left, occasionally glancing over with grudging respect. His custom rifle represented the pinnacle of precision shooting technology, a hand-built action bedded into a carbon fiber stock, topped with a scope that cost more than most people earned in a month. Computer-calculated ballistic data was programmed into a device that accounted for temperature, humidity, altitude, and even the rotation of the Earth. "Mrs. Chun," he said during the preparation period, "I've got to ask, what's your dope for 800 yards with that rifle?" Maggie consulted her weathered notebook, pages filled with handwritten tables of data accumulated over decades of shooting. "Depends on conditions," she replied. "Today, probably 22 clicks up. Hold 2 minutes left for wind." Jake's eyebrows rose slightly. Her terminology was precise and professional, indicating serious ballistic knowledge despite her simple equipment. "Minutes of angle" was the language of precision shooting, and her ability to estimate wind correction in angular measurements suggested far more experience than her casual demeanor implied. "Mind me asking how you developed that data?" Jake continued. "Range time," Maggie answered simply. "Shot this rifle at known distances under different conditions for 40 years. Kept records of everything." The approach was old-fashioned, but fundamentally sound. Before computerized ballistic calculators, serious marksmen developed firing tables through careful observation and record-keeping. Maggie's notebook represented thousands of rounds fired and meticulously recorded, creating a database that was specific to her rifle, her ammunition, and her shooting technique. Other competitors were making final preparations with equipment that would have seemed like science fiction to World War II-era marksmen. Digital wind meters measured air movement in 3 dimensions. Laser rangefinders provided distance measurements accurate to the yard. Ballistic computers processed dozens of variables to calculate precise aiming corrections. The contrast was striking: modern technology versus accumulated experience, computer precision versus human intuition, equipment advantages versus fundamental shooting skills. In most situations, the technological advantages would prove decisive. 800 yards was where equipment limitations typically trumped individual skill. "Relay 3, you have 10 minutes for unlimited sighting shots at 800 yards, announced the range officer. The extended sighting period reflected the difficulty of the distance. Even experienced competitors often needed multiple shots to find the correct adjustments for the extreme range, and environmental conditions could change significantly during the longer firing sequence. Maggie's first sighting shot produced a cloud of dust somewhere near the target area, though spotting exact impact was difficult even with her basic spotting scope. The bullet's flight time was noticeably longer than at shorter ranges, and the crack of the muzzle blast was followed by a distinct delay before impact. She made a substantial elevation adjustment, nearly 2 full turns of the rear sight elevation knob, and sent another round downrange. This one appeared to strike closer to the target center, though precise evaluation was challenging without high magnification optics. Her third sighting shot prompted a smaller windage adjustment. Wind conditions at 800 yards were complex, with flags at different distances showing slightly different directions and speeds. Reading wind across such an extended range required estimating average conditions that would affect the bullet throughout its flight path. Around her, other competitors were struggling with similar challenges, though their high-tech equipment provided more precise feedback. Several shooters fired 5 or 6 sighting shots while fighting wind conditions and equipment adjustments. A few were clearly having difficulty achieving consistent impacts on the target at all. The most humbling aspect of 800-yard shooting was how it exposed every weakness in technique and equipment. Tiny inconsistencies in trigger control that went unnoticed at shorter ranges became significant scoring penalties. Minor variations in ammunition performance that were irrelevant at 200 yards could scatter shots across multiple scoring rings. Military surplus ammunition, which Maggie was shooting, faced particular challenges at extreme range. Mass-produced cartridges had greater variation in bullet weight, powder charges, and case dimensions than carefully prepared match ammunition. These variations became magnified over 800 yards of flight, potentially creating group sizes that exceeded the scoring rings entirely. Despite these theoretical disadvantages, Maggie appeared satisfied with her sighting shots and began preparing for the record string. Her routine remained unchanged from shorter ranges. The same deliberate position building, the same careful breathing pattern, the same methodical approach to each shot. "Make ready for record fire," came the announcement. 5 shots for score, 800 yards. Take your time and shoot carefully. The advice was appropriate. At 800 yards, rushing led to missed targets and embarrassing scores. Even professional marksmen approached this distance with respect and careful attention to every detail of technique and equipment. Maggie settled behind her rifle with movements that had become automatic through decades of repetition. The M1's weight, which some considered excessive, actually provided stability that helped offset the challenges of shooting without optical magnification. The rifle's substantial mass dampened the effects of minor technique inconsistencies that could throw shots off target. Her first record shot required nearly 30 seconds of preparation. At 800 yards through iron sights, target acquisition became a process of careful estimation rather than precise sight alignment. The front sight post completely covered the target, forcing her to use consistent holds based on experience rather than visual reference points. When the shot broke, observers with spotting scopes could see dust kicked up near the target area, though determining precise impact location required careful observation. The bullet's flight time meant that wind conditions during the nearly 1-second flight could differ from conditions at the firing line. Her second shot followed almost 2 minutes later, as she took time to reassess wind conditions and settle into her shooting position completely. The M1's semi-automatic action allowed relatively quick follow-up shots, but at extreme range, careful shot preparation was more important than speed. Jake Morrison, shooting nearby, found himself impressed despite his initial skepticism. Maggie's shooting routine demonstrated the kind of disciplined fundamentals that separated true marksmen from equipment-dependent competitors. Her position was rock solid, her breathing controlled, and her trigger technique smooth and consistent. Shot 3 required adjustment for what appeared to be a wind change. Maggie paused to observe the range flags and made a small windage correction based on visual cues that would be invisible to most shooters. The ability to read environmental conditions was often more important than equipment advantages, particularly at extreme ranges where conditions could change during the firing sequence. Her fourth shot came after another extended preparation period. At 800 yards, patience was not just a virtue, but a necessity. Rushing shots at this distance almost guaranteed poor results, while careful shot preparation could overcome significant equipment limitations. The fifth and final shot represented the culmination of 40 years of experience with the vintage rifle. Every lesson learned through decades of practice, every data point recorded in her weathered notebook, every fundamental principle of marksmanship contributed to this single trigger press. When targets were pulled for scoring, the anticipation was palpable. 800 yards separated serious marksmen from casual shooters, and equipment advantages typically dominated at this extreme range. Modern rifles with precision-loaded ammunition usually demonstrated clear superiority over older military weapons. The electronic scoreboard updated with results that caused several people to look twice. Maggie had shot 45 out of 50, not her best score of the day, but remarkable for iron sights at 800 yards. 2 shots in the X ring, 2 in the 9 ring, and 1 shot just outside the scoring area for 0 points. More significantly, her 4 scoring shots had grouped within 6 inches, exceptional precision for the combination of vintage equipment and extreme range. Modern precision rifles often struggled to achieve better accuracy at 800 yards, even with optimal conditions and custom ammunition. Jake Morrison examined the scoreboard with professional interest. After 4 stages, Maggie was in second place overall, trailing his own score by only 3 points. Her consistency across all ranges had proven that fundamental marksmanship skills could compete effectively against modern equipment advantages. 45 at 800 yards with iron sights, he said to his shooting partner. I've seen guys with $10,000 rifles shoot worse scores than that. The observation was accurate. Precision shooting at extreme range tested every aspect of marksmanship: equipment, technique, ammunition quality, environmental reading skills, and mental discipline. Maggie had demonstrated competence in all areas using equipment that most competitors considered obsolete. Other competitors were taking notice as well. The elderly woman with the vintage rifle had not only survived the technical challenges of 800-yard shooting but had done so with scores that placed her among the top competitors. Equipment advantages, while significant, had proven less decisive than many had assumed. The final standings after 4 stages showed Maggie Chun in second place overall, an achievement that would have seemed impossible when she first unpacked her M1 Garand that morning. Jake Morrison led by a narrow margin, followed by Maggie, then 2 other experienced competitors with modern precision rifles. However, the competition was not over. The championship format included a final elimination round. The top 5 shooters would compete head-to-head in a sudden death format at 600 yards. Each competitor would fire 1 shot, and the lowest score would be eliminated. The process would continue until only 1 shooter remained. Sudden death competition added psychological pressure that could overwhelm even experienced marksmen. The knowledge that a single poor shot would eliminate months of preparation and training created stress that often caused technique breakdowns in otherwise competent shooters. For Maggie, the format represented both opportunity and challenge. Her consistent performance throughout the day suggested solid fundamentals that might withstand pressure better than equipment-dependent techniques. However, the elimination format also meant that a single equipment malfunction or environmental miscalculation could end her unlikely championship run immediately. As the 5 finalists prepared for the elimination round, the atmosphere grew noticeably tense. Prize money, reputation, and bragging rights were all on the line. The margin for error was 0. Each shot would determine survival or elimination. Jake Morrison checked and rechecked his equipment with the nervous energy of someone who had been in this position before. His custom rifle and precisely loaded ammunition represented thousands of hours of development and testing, but championship pressure could make even perfect equipment perform imperfectly. The other 3 finalists, all experienced competitive shooters with modern precision rifles, went through elaborate preparation routines designed to manage stress and ensure optimal performance. Equipment checks, breathing exercises, and mental rehearsals were all part of their championship preparation. Maggie's preparation was notably simpler. She checked her rifle's action, confirmed her sight settings, and consulted her notebook one final time. Her decades of experience with the M1 Garand meant that equipment familiarity was not an issue. She could operate the rifle instinctively under any conditions. Finalists, take your positions for the elimination round, announced the range officer. 600 yards, 1 shot per competitor. Lowest score is eliminated. You'll shoot in order of current standing, lowest first. The format meant that Maggie would shoot third, after 2 competitors who were currently behind her in the standings. The psychological advantage of shooting later was balanced by the pressure of knowing what score was needed to survive each round. The first competitor, a military veteran shooting a custom bolt-action rifle, took nearly 3 minutes to prepare his shot. The pressure of elimination was visible in his extended routine and multiple position adjustments. When he finally fired, his bullet struck the 9 ring for 9 points, a respectable score under normal circumstances, but potentially vulnerable in sudden death competition. The second shooter, using a precision semi-automatic rifle with advanced optics, settled into position with obvious nervous tension. His shot preparation was methodical, but showed signs of overthinking, multiple sight adjustments, and breathing pattern changes that suggested anxiety was affecting his normally smooth technique. His shot scored 10 points with an inner 10-ring hit. Maggie's turn brought a moment of unusual quiet to the range. The contrast between her vintage equipment and the high-tech rifles used by other finalists had attracted attention throughout the day, and now the ultimate test would determine whether skill could triumph over equipment advantages. She took position behind her M1 Garand with the same methodical approach she had used all day. The rifle's familiar weight and balance provided comfort in the high-stress environment. Her sight picture was established quickly and naturally, the product of thousands of repetitions with identical equipment. The shot broke cleanly after a standard preparation period that showed no signs of championship pressure. The .30-06 cartridge sent its bullet downrange with the same authority it had displayed throughout the competition, and observers tracked its flight toward the distant target. When the impact was announced as a 10-ring hit with X-ring scoring value, the crowd's reaction was audible. An elderly woman with a World War II-era rifle had just outshot modern precision equipment under the ultimate pressure of championship elimination. The fourth and fifth competitors both managed 10-ring hits, but neither achieved X-ring precision. When the first elimination was announced, the military veteran with 9 points was sent home, despite shooting a score that would have won many local competitions. The semifinal round created even more pressure, for shooters remained, and 3 would advance to the final. Each competitor now understood that they were facing someone who could shoot exceptionally well under pressure, regardless of equipment limitations. Jake Morrison shot first in the semifinal, his custom rifle delivering a perfect X-ring hit that scored maximum points. The pressure was now on the remaining competitors to match perfection or face elimination. The second shooter, clearly affected by the pressure, spent nearly 4 minutes preparing his shot. Multiple position adjustments and sight picture confirmations suggested that championship pressure was beginning to affect his technique. His eventual shot scored 10 points, but missed the X-ring, making him vulnerable depending on the remaining competitors' performance. Maggie's semifinal shot demonstrated the mental toughness that separated champions from also-rans. Her preparation was identical to every previous shot. No wasted motion, no signs of pressure, no deviation from the routine that had carried her this far. When her M1 barked, the bullet found the X-ring for maximum points. The final competitor, shooting a precision rifle worth more than most cars, faced the pressure of needing an X-ring hit to guarantee advancement. His shot preparation showed visible tension, and when his bullet struck the 9 ring, he became the second elimination of the day. 3 shooters remained for the championship finale. Jake Morrison with his modern precision rifle, Maggie Chun with her vintage M1 Garand, and another competitor shooting advanced tactical equipment. The contrast in equipment ages spanned 75 years, but all 3 had proven their ability to perform under ultimate pressure. The final round would determine not just the winner of $25,000, but also settle the debate between modern equipment advantages and traditional marksmanship fundamentals. For Maggie, it represented validation of 40 years of practice with her father's rifle. For Jake, it was a chance to prove that modern precision shooting could overcome any challenge. The championship finale brought an unusual stillness to the Riverside County shooting range. Word had spread throughout the facility about the remarkable competition unfolding between modern precision equipment and a vintage World War II rifle, drawing spectators from other events to witness what many considered impossible: an elderly woman with obsolete equipment competing for a major championship against the finest marksmen and equipment available. 3 competitors remained for the final shots that would determine the winner of $25,000 and settle a debate that went far beyond prize money. Jake Morrison, shooting his custom precision rifle worth more than most people's annual salaries, represented the pinnacle of modern shooting technology. The third finalist, Tom Bradley, carried equipment that reflected decades of competitive shooting evolution: precision optics, custom ammunition, and accessories designed specifically for championship-level performance. Maggie Chin stood quietly behind the firing line, her weathered M1 Garand representing not just a different era of firearms technology, but an entirely different philosophy of marksmanship. Where modern competitors relied on equipment to overcome human limitations, Maggie had spent 40 years learning to work within those limitations through disciplined practice and accumulated experience. The psychological pressure of sudden death elimination had claimed 2 competent marksmen in previous rounds, both shooting modern equipment that should have provided significant advantages over iron sights. Championship pressure created stress that could cause technique breakdowns in even experienced competitors, making mental discipline as important as technical skill. Final 3 competitors, announced the range officer through his megaphone. You'll shoot in reverse order of current standings. 1 shot each at 600 yards for the championship. Lowest score is eliminated, highest score wins. The format meant that Maggie would shoot first, followed by Tom Bradley, with Jake Morrison shooting last. The disadvantage of shooting first was offset by reduced pressure. She would establish the target score without knowing what was needed to win, while later shooters would face the stress of knowing exactly what score they needed to achieve. Maggie took her position behind the M1 with movements that showed no sign of championship pressure. Her 40 years of experience with the rifle had created muscle memory that functioned independently of stress or environmental conditions. The familiar weight and balance of the weapon provided comfort that no amount of modern technology could replicate. 600 yards represented the perfect distance for demonstrating the capabilities of her vintage rifle. Long enough to challenge iron sight accuracy significantly, but not so extreme as to make environmental factors impossible to read without sophisticated equipment. At this range, fundamental marksmanship skills could still compete effectively against technological advantages. She consulted her notebook one final time, confirming sight settings and wind corrections developed through decades of careful observation and record-keeping. The data represented thousands of rounds fired under various conditions, creating a database that was specific to her rifle, her ammunition, and her shooting technique. Wind conditions had remained relatively stable throughout the elimination rounds, showing a consistent light breeze from the left that would push bullets approximately 18 inches at 600 yards. Reading environmental conditions accurately was often more important than equipment advantages, particularly when shooting at ranges where small miscalculations could move bullets completely out of the scoring area. Her sight picture was established with the automatic precision of someone who had performed this routine countless times. The M1's iron sights, which appeared primitive compared to modern optical equipment, actually provided several advantages for experienced users: no parallax error, no optical distortion, and complete reliability under any environmental conditions. The target at 600 yards appeared as a small, indistinct shape through her rear sight aperture. Modern competitors with high magnification scopes could see individual scoring rings clearly, but Maggie was aiming using holds and techniques developed through decades of practice with identical equipment under similar conditions. Her breathing pattern settled into the controlled rhythm that preceded every serious shot. Heart rate slowed through practiced relaxation techniques that didn't require conscious thought. Mental focus narrowed to the immediate task of trigger control and sight alignment, excluding the pressure and distractions of championship competition. The shot broke with the clean surprise that characterized proper trigger technique. The .30-06 cartridge sent its bullet downrange with familiar authority, and experienced observers tracked its nearly 1-second flight toward the distant target. The substantial recoil of military ammunition rocked her backward slightly, but her shooting position absorbed the energy without disturbing her ability to follow through. Through spotting scopes, observers could see the bullet impact near the center of the target, though determining exact scoring would require official measurement. The crowd's reaction suggested a successful shot, but precise evaluation would have to wait for target retrieval and official scoring. Tom Bradley moved to the firing line with visible nervousness that suggested championship pressure was beginning to affect his normally confident technique. His equipment represented the latest in precision shooting technology, a custom rifle built specifically for long-range competition, topped with optics that cost more than many competitors' entire shooting setups. His preparation routine was elaborate and methodical, involving multiple equipment checks and careful environmental assessment using electronic instruments that provided precise measurements of wind speed, direction, and atmospheric conditions. The technological advantages were significant, but they also created additional complexity that could become a liability under pressure. Nearly 5 minutes elapsed before Tom felt ready to fire his championship shot. His extended preparation suggested that pressure was affecting his decision-making process, creating doubt and overthinking that could lead to technique breakdowns. Confidence was often more important than equipment when shooting under stress. When his shot finally broke, observers noted a slight tremor in his shooting position that indicated tension was affecting his normally smooth technique. The bullet's impact appeared to be in the scoring area, but the precise location would determine whether he had matched or exceeded Maggie's performance. Jake Morrison approached the firing line with the calm confidence of someone who had won major competitions before. His custom rifle represented thousands of hours of development and testing, creating a shooting system that was precisely matched to his technique and preferences. The combination of experience and optimal equipment made him the clear favorite to win the championship. His preparation was efficient and methodical without showing signs of pressure or doubt. Equipment checks were routine rather than nervous, and His environmental assessment was based on years of experience reading conditions at this specific range. The advantages of shooting last included knowing what score was needed to win, though this knowledge could create pressure to exceed normal capabilities. The target announcement for Maggie's shot came over the range loudspeakers. Competitor 47, 10 points, X-ring. The result brought audible gasps from spectators who had watched her progression throughout the day. Shooting an X-ring hit under championship pressure with iron sights at 600 yards represented marksmanship of the highest order. Tom Bradley's shot was announced as 9 points, meaning he was eliminated despite shooting a score that would have been competitive in most circumstances. Championship pressure had apparently caused a slight technique breakdown that moved his bullet out of the 10 ring by a matter of inches. The championship now came down to Jake Morrison's final shot. He needed to match Maggie's X-ring hit to force a shoot-off, or exceed it to win outright. Missing the 10 ring entirely would hand the championship to a 73-year-old woman shooting a rifle manufactured before many competitors were born. Jake's shot preparation showed the focus and discipline that had made him a multiple-time champion. His routine was identical to every previous shot, showing no deviation that might indicate pressure was affecting his technique. When the shot broke, it appeared clean and well-executed. The wait for target scoring seemed to stretch interminably as officials carefully measured bullet holes and determined exact point values. At this level of competition, championships were often decided by fractions of inches, making precise measurement critical. Competitor 23, 10 points, 10 ring, came the announcement. Jake had shot well, but his bullet had missed the X-ring by a small margin. The championship belonged to Maggie Chun. The reaction from spectators was immediate and emotional. Many had witnessed what they considered impossible. An elderly woman with obsolete equipment had defeated the finest precision shooting equipment and most skilled marksmen available. The victory represented more than individual achievement. It validated the importance of fundamental marksmanship skills over technological advantages. Jake Morrison was the first to congratulate Maggie, approaching with genuine respect and admiration. "Ma'am," he said, extending his hand. "That was some of the finest shooting I've ever witnessed. Your father would be proud." The comment brought tears to Maggie's eyes for the first time during the entire competition. Throughout the day, she had maintained the controlled composure that characterized serious marksmen, but the emotional significance of winning with her father's rifle finally registered. "He taught me that equipment doesn't shoot groups. Shooters shoot groups," she replied. "A good rifle in trained hands will outperform a perfect rifle in untrained hands every time." The principle was one that modern shooting sports sometimes forgot in the pursuit of technological advantages. While equipment improvements could enhance performance, they could never replace the fundamental skills that separated true marksmen from equipment-dependent shooters. Prize presentation took place immediately after the competition concluded, with Maggie receiving a check for $25,000 and a trophy that would commemorate one of the most remarkable upset victories in precision shooting history. More importantly, she had proven that the marksmanship skills developed during World War II remained relevant and competitive in modern shooting sports. Local media coverage focused on the human interest aspects of the story, a grandmother proving that age and obsolete equipment couldn't overcome skill and determination. National shooting publications would later analyze the technical aspects of her victory, examining how fundamental marksmanship principles had triumphed over technological advantages. For Maggie, however, the victory represented something more personal. Her grandson, who had dismissed his grandfather's military service as irrelevant to modern capabilities, would learn that the skills and values of previous generations remained meaningful and applicable. The M1 Garand that had served in the Pacific Theater had proven itself capable of competing against the finest equipment that modern technology could produce. As she packed her rifle into its ancient case, several competitors approached with questions about her technique and equipment. The interest was genuine. Serious marksmen recognized exceptional shooting regardless of the equipment used to achieve it. Her victory had demonstrated principles that applied to all precision shooting, regardless of technological sophistication. "Mrs. Chun," asked one young competitor, "would you be willing to do some coaching? I'd like to learn to shoot like that." The request was repeated by several other shooters who recognized that her fundamentals were superior to their own, despite their equipment advantages. The irony was not lost on anyone. Modern marksmen wanting to learn from techniques developed 75 years earlier. Marksmanship is marksmanship, Maggie replied. The principles don't change with equipment. Position, breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, follow through, master those, and you can shoot anything accurately. Her offer to provide instruction was accepted eagerly by several competitors who had spent thousands of dollars on equipment while neglecting the fundamental skills that formed the foundation of accurate shooting. The day's competition had demonstrated that technological advantages meant nothing without the disciplined technique to apply them effectively. The drive home gave Maggie time to reflect on a day that had exceeded her wildest expectations. She had entered the competition primarily to make a point to her grandson about the continuing relevance of his grandfather's military experience. Winning the championship had been beyond her realistic hopes, though she had always known her rifle was capable of competitive accuracy. Her cell phone rang as she pulled into her driveway, displaying her grandson's number. Word of her victory had apparently reached him through social media coverage of the competition, and his tone suggested a combination of amazement and newfound respect. "Grandma, I just saw the news about your shooting competition. Is it true you won the whole thing with Grandpa's old rifle?" "It's true," she replied simply. "Your grandfather's rifle still shoots straight when someone knows how to use it properly." The conversation that followed was different from their previous discussions about military history and modern capabilities. Her grandson's questions focused on learning rather than arguing, showing genuine interest in understanding how skills developed decades earlier could remain relevant and competitive. "Could you teach me to shoot like that?" he asked, echoing the requests from competitors at the range. "Your grandfather tried to teach you when you were younger," Maggie reminded him. "You said his methods were old-fashioned, and that modern shooting was completely different." "I was wrong," came the admission that Maggie had hoped to hear for years. "Will you give me another chance to learn?" The request represented victory more meaningful than any trophy or prize money. Her grandson's newfound respect for his grandfather's skills and service validated the sacrifice and dedication of an entire generation that had served their country with distinction. "We'll start next weekend," Maggie agreed. "But you'll learn the right way, fundamental marksmanship principles that work regardless of equipment. If you master those, you'll be able to shoot anything accurately." The conversation continued for nearly an hour as her grandson asked detailed questions about shooting technique, equipment, and the competition itself. His genuine interest and respect represented a transformation that had been years in the making, finally achieved through demonstrated performance rather than argument or persuasion. Over the following weeks, news of Maggie's victory spread throughout the precision shooting community and beyond. Shooting magazines featured detailed articles about her equipment and technique. Online forums debated the implications of vintage equipment defeating modern technology. Equipment manufacturers quietly examined whether their emphasis on technological advancement had overshadowed the importance of fundamental marksmanship skills. More importantly for Maggie, her grandson proved to be a dedicated student who approached marksmanship training with newfound respect for traditional methods and values. The M1 Garand that had served his grandfather in the Pacific Theater became the foundation for learning skills that connected him to family history, while developing capabilities that were entirely relevant to modern circumstances. The first training session took place at a local range where Maggie had practiced for decades. Her grandson arrived with equipment purchases that reflected his previous approach to shooting. Expensive accessories and gadgets that promised to improve performance without requiring improved technique. "Put all that away," Maggie instructed. "You'll learn with iron sights and basic equipment. Master the fundamentals first, then add complexity later if needed." The approach was identical to military marksmanship training that had produced some of the finest shooters in history. Starting with basic equipment forced students to develop proper technique rather than relying on technological aids to compensate for poor fundamentals. Hours of dry-fire practice preceded live ammunition shooting. Position building, breathing control, sight alignment, and trigger technique were practiced until they became automatic responses that functioned independently of stress or environmental conditions. The approach was methodical and sometimes tedious, but it produced results that equipment purchases could never achieve. Grandpa was right. Her grandson admitted after several weeks of training. Equipment doesn't substitute for proper technique. I've learned more in a month of basic training than in years of trying different rifles and accessories. The acknowledgement represented more than improved shooting skills. Her grandson was learning to value discipline, patience, and methodical practice over instant gratification and technological shortcuts. The lessons extended far beyond marksmanship into principles that applied to all aspects of life. Months later, Maggie received an invitation to serve as head coach for the state junior marksmanship team. Her reputation as someone who could teach fundamental skills effectively had spread throughout the shooting community, and younger shooters were eager to learn from her proven methods. The coaching position represented an opportunity to share knowledge with a new generation of marksmen while ensuring that traditional skills and values remained relevant in modern shooting sports. Her students would learn that excellence required dedication and practice rather than equipment purchases, and that the principles of marksmanship transcended technological advancement. Your grandfather would be proud, she told her grandson as they prepared for another training session with the M1 Garand. He believed that America's strength came from citizens who took responsibility for developing their own capabilities rather than depending on others to provide solutions. The philosophy extended beyond shooting sports into broader concepts of self-reliance, personal responsibility, and respect for the achievements of previous generations. Her grandson was learning lessons that had been nearly forgotten in an age that emphasized technological solutions over individual discipline and skill development. The M1 Garand that had served with distinction in the Pacific Theater continued to serve as an instrument of education and character development. Each shot fired in training connected present-day students to historical traditions while developing capabilities that remained entirely relevant to contemporary challenges. As news of her championship victory faded from immediate attention, Maggie continued her quiet work of teaching fundamental marksmanship skills to anyone willing to learn. Her students ranged from curious beginners to experienced competitors who recognized that their expensive equipment couldn't compensate for gaps in basic technique. The lesson of her championship victory resonated far beyond shooting sports. In an age increasingly dominated by technological solutions and instant gratification, she had demonstrated that traditional values of patience, practice, and personal responsibility remained the foundation of true excellence. Her father's rifle had carried the message across generations, proving that some principles never become obsolete. The old M1 Garand rested in its case, ready for the next training session or competition. The rifle that had mocked by modern marksmen as obsolete had proven that excellence transcended equipment limitations when applied with skill, determination, and respect for fundamental principles that had been tested and proven over generations of American marksmen. "You'll miss, sweetheart," they had said. The dead center hit that followed would be remembered long after the mockers were forgotten. Sometimes the old ways were still the best ways, and sometimes a 75-year-old rifle in trained hands could teach the most modern equipment a lesson about what really mattered in precision shooting. The story would be told and retold wherever serious marksmen gathered, serving as a reminder that technology could enhance human capability, but could never replace the fundamental skills that separated true craftsmen from equipment-dependent amateurs. Maggie Chun and her father's M1 Garand had proven that some victories transcended prize money, representing principles that remained as relevant as they had been on the battlefields of the Pacific Theater decades earlier. As the three finalists prepared for their championship shots, the entire range fell quiet. This was the moment that would determine whether an elderly woman with obsolete equipment could defeat the best that modern precision shooting had to offer. The answer lay in 3 trigger presses that would conclude one of the most remarkable shooting competitions in decades. "Gentlemen and lady," announced the range officer, "for the championship, you'll shoot in reverse order of standing. Best score wins $25,000 and the Riverside County Precision Shooting Championship." The stage was set for a conclusion that would be remembered long after the prize money was spent. Equipment versus experience, technology versus tradition, modern precision versus time-tested fundamentals. The old M1 Garand was about to face its ultimate test against the finest that contemporary shooting sports could produce. Jake Morrison looked at the scoreboard with professional respect. After 3 stages, Maggie was tied for 3rd overall, behind his own leading score and another experienced competitor, but ahead of 24 shooters with modern equipment and serious competitive credentials. The final stage would be 800 yards, the ultimate test of precision shooting where equipment advantages typically dominated. At this range, even professional marksmen struggled with the combination of environmental factors and inherent accuracy limitations of their equipment. For an elderly woman shooting a 75-year-old battle rifle with iron sights, 800 yards would seem impossible. The target would be barely visible as a speck, wind effects would be magnified dramatically, and bullet drop would require precise compensation that most shooters achieve through sophisticated ballistic calculations. Yet as competitors prepared for the final stage, fewer people were betting against the quiet woman with the M1 Garand. She had already exceeded everyone's expectations, and the shooting community had learned to respect demonstrated performance over theoretical equipment advantages. 800 yards, Jake Morrison said to himself as he prepared his own equipment for the final stage. This is where we find out what she's really made of.